when a young family seeking a bright future moves into a new house. It seems as if their dreams have come true, until a malevolent force makes itself known. Tormented visions and violent attacks leave them all questioning just what insidious force slithers behind the walls of their new home. Will they make it out alive, or will the entity known as Sallie keep them as playmates forever? This is a case I have personal experience with, and it certainly is very unnerving. I wouldn't recommend watching this video in the dark unless you like a challenge. Located in northeast Kansas is a town known as Atchison, situated on the bluffs of the Missouri River and offering sweeping views of the river valley beyond. Grand Victorian homes and cobblestone roads recall glorious days when wealthy lumber merchants and railroad magnates once occupied the town. But as one walks the streets today, they can't help but feel a tingle down their spine and a cold shudder in their soul. It seems to be a kind of hotspot that harbors otherworldly forces. The time is March of 1993. Newly married couple Tony and Deborah Pickman begin renting a house in Atchison. After weeks of unboxing their belongings, their new house is finally starting to feel like a home. In the words of Tony Pickman, "We had finally moved into a new place. My wife was expecting, and we were just very much looking forward to starting a family together. It was a good time for us." And with Deborah Pickman later saying that, "We thought the home was perfect for us. It was spacious, it had several bedrooms, and we just knew that it was the perfect house." But what they failed to realize was that this house was far from perfect for anyone. After about a month of living there, strange things began to occur. First, the TV began to turn on and off by itself, and small objects like their keys began to move on their own. Thinking that perhaps they were misremembering where they had placed their keys, and the TV turning on and off was possibly faulty wiring, they contacted their landlord about the matter. But after having an electrician come out, he would find nothing wrong with the wiring. Although old, it was functioning as intended. Although the Pickmans thought the happenings were strange, they simply overlooked them. Later that summer, Deborah would give birth to a baby boy who they would name Taylor. And when the young family comes back home from the hospital, Deborah's sister Karen flies in from Buffalo, New York, to help her sister get some much-needed rest as she begins to heal from giving birth and starts adjusting to taking care of a newborn. Although the help is greatly appreciated, it seems to pass quickly. Although the Pickmans are still adjusting to the late-night cries of their newborn son, his cries seem to wake up more than just his parents. One afternoon, while Tony hangs pictures upstairs, he sees a shadow move out of the corner of his eye. He then hears the giggle of a little girl. Finding this odd, he glances around his general area, and it's here that he discovers something even stranger. There in his son's nursery on the floor is all of Taylor's stuffed animals, neatly arranged in a circle. Thinking this was bizarre, they ultimately would laugh it off, thinking that perhaps someone they knew had come into the home and played a prank on them, that perhaps they didn't notice it until now. They thought that maybe Tony's brother Alan, who was a known prankster, was to blame. Laughing it off, they went back to what they had been doing previously. It wasn't until a few minutes later that Deborah would walk back by the nursery and notice the exact same thing had occurred again. All of her son's stuffed toys were arranged in a circle, and all facing outward, yet again on the floor. Now, unsure of what was causing these strange happenings, they checked all their windows and doors. They were all locked. If it was Tony's brother Alan, they don't know how he would have been getting in and out without any of them noticing, and within a matter of minutes. The following morning, Tony had his brother come over to their house. It's important to note that Alan did live next door to the Pickmans at this time. Once they had all gotten settled on the couches in the living room, Tony began to ask, "So Alan, just how did you get in and out of our house last night without any of us noticing?" It was in this moment that Tony began to worry. Although he and his brother had always played tricks on one another, his brother wasn't known to be a liar. Alan looked back at him genuinely confused. He told Tony that he had no idea what he was talking about, that he wasn't even home last night. Finding an opportunity for a laugh, however, Alan then starts asking Tony if he thinks that he has a ghost. He then takes his brother's camera and starts snapping photos around the house while asking, "Is there a presence here with us? And if so, make the stuffed animals move again. Do something." As Tony and Deborah follow Alan, the three are then left in utter shock as a stuffed bear sitting on a nearby small chair is suddenly thrown onto the floor by something they can't see. Taking what they had just seen as some kind of a warning, Tony, Deborah, and Alan take baby Taylor and rush outside into the family's vehicle. As the baby cries, as Tony buckles him into the car seat, Tony cries as well, but out of pain. He suddenly feels a sharp, stinging sensation coming from his back. Thinking it was a bee sting or a spider bite, he finishes buckling the baby in and then closes the door. He figures he'll check it out later. Alan then heads back to his house next door, and Debbie and Tony with their baby drive across town to Tony's parents' house. After arriving, the stinging sensation on Tony's back has only grown more noticeable. Again, thinking it was a bee sting or a spider bite, he finally has his wife take a look at it. Upon lifting up his shirt, she starts to freak out. From Tony's lower back to up by his shoulder blades are what appear to be 3 very distinct and fresh claw marks. Her anxiety is soon felt by everyone in the house. After discussing what had been occurring amongst themselves, the Pickmans now think that what they could be experiencing may be evil. Coming to this conclusion leaves their heads spiraling, making them ponder a number of questions. Just what will they do? Will they go back to the house? Where could they go if they don't? And much more. Together, Debbie and Tony do their best to calm down and to face the decision that they have to make head-on as a couple. In Tony's words, "We were newly married. We had just started a family. We didn't have the money or the resources to be able to afford to move again. We were essentially bled out. We had a baby, and we needed a place to stay. So we decided to go back that night." Although incredibly apprehensive about doing so, the Pickmans seemingly have no other choice. The following day, Tony meets up with his brother Alan yet again. Alan seems to have an idea on how to tackle the situation. Alan tells Debbie and Tony that his boss's sister is a psychic medium, and he thinks that they should invite her to try and figure out what could be residing within the house, and if she's able to decipher that. Finding this proposal weird because they've never delved into anything like this before, but feeling like it couldn't hurt to give it a try, they agree to have Alan reach out and ask her to come to the house. 3 days later, she would arrive. Her name was Barbara. Originally based out of California, she actively engaged in psychic work and lectured at various universities about parapsychology. Not having been given any information about the house or its history, she sat in the living room and explained to the Pickmans what it was that she did, and then asked them to tell her everything that had occurred up until that point so that she could fully grasp the whole picture. After they went through it all with Barbara, she then asked them to visit the nursery to begin. Tony would later say that, "I don't really believe in psychics, so I kind of blew her off at first. I didn't know what to think." Barbara begins her process and quickly begins to lose her breath. She starts choking and coughing. She then flees the room, heading for the basement below. Tony later would say that she told us that whatever was here didn't want us here, and that it doesn't like anyone in this room, referring to the nursery. As the Pigmans follow Barbara down the stairs, she soon stops at the bottom of them and begins to sense another spirit, but this one doesn't seem ominous. She discovers that the spirit is that of a 7-year-old little girl named Sallie. She believes Sallie passed away within the home itself. She also would come to the conclusion that it was Sallie who had attacked Tony, believing that baby Taylor was hers to protect. She had become territorial. Between Deborah and Barbara, they come to the consensus that Sallie is a guardian of sorts, that it would be a good idea to set aside a space for her and to give her some toys of her own to appease her. Tony, however, thought that this wasn't a good idea at all. He still believed that whatever dwelled within their house was malevolent and evil, that it was a bad idea for them to interact with whatever this thing was in any way, shape, or form. However, disregarding her husband, Deborah does exactly this. After the psychic departs, several days later, Deborah would go shopping for toys for Sallie, hoping that her offerings would appease the spirit and all would be well. She also picks up the developed film from the photos that Tony took during the psychic's visit. Excited to see if any of them contained an image of Sallie, she quickly opens up the envelope to look at them. What she sees, however, disturbs her. Several of the photos are bizarrely distorted, and one even contains some kind of malignant-looking black blob. Horrified, Deborah rushes back home with the photos and the toys in hand. Walking through the front door, she immediately shows Tony. Having been the one who took the photos, he doesn't know what to make of the anomalies. One photo in particular catches his attention. In his own words, "The picture that really got me as we were walking down the stairs with Barbara. I turned around and took a picture, and floating midair is this thing. I couldn't explain it. It made me scared." Following looking at the photos, Deb once again references Barbara's convictions and continues to believe that Sallie is a protector. She then continues with her plan and makes a dedicated space for Sallie and adds the toys to it. Although Tony believes that the force haunting their home is evil, things do seem to go dormant for a short period of time following the offerings to Sallie. However, this peace would not last. Several weeks later, Deb's sister Karen would return again for a follow-up visit, and this time along with her husband. As the couples catch up on what's been happening in their lives, Deborah and Tony walk into the kitchen and grab themselves and their guests some more food and drinks. Their nice evening is soon interrupted by a piercing scream. There before Karen and her husband, a stuffed animal, the same one that had fallen before, that was sitting in one of the chairs, had suddenly and spontaneously caught fire before their very eyes. As Tony and Deborah rush back into the living room, they too were left flabbergasted at the sight. Tony then rushes in with a towel to extinguish the fire. In his own words, "If it can do this, what's keeping it from setting one of us on fire, or hurting us, or harming the baby?" Following the flames of the previous evening, Deborah tries to convince her husband that the fire was an isolated incident, and for the next 2 weeks, things at the house remain eerily calm. Tony, who works the overnight graveyard shift at a nearby grain elevator, adjusts his day to his schedule. Upon returning home from work in the early morning hours, he tends to eat a meal when he gets home. One particular morning, following the calmness within the home, he grabs himself a glass of juice and something to eat. As he goes to place the pitcher of juice back in the refrigerator, he sees something move out of the corner of his eye. Turning his head, pitcher still in hand, he sees the apparition of a young girl before him. Shocked, he drops the pitcher of juice, and it shatters on the floor. Almost as soon as the pitcher had broke, as it smashed into the floor below, the apparition vanished. Paying no mind to it, Tony quickly runs upstairs where he greets his wife in their bedroom. Barely able to get a word out, he's finally able to say to her, "I just saw Sallie." Intrigued, Deborah immediately asks just what she looked like, and then proceeds to bombard him with many more questions. Rather than being scared, Deb is elated. She's more curious than ever before. In her own words, "I was terribly jealous. Tony got to see this little girl, or the apparition of her. She's curious just why, of all people, Sallie would reveal herself to Tony. She wonders why she didn't reveal herself to her." For the next 2 months, things once again go dormant within the home. But this too wouldn't last. One night, as the moon hangs high above the Pickman residence, as the couple sleeps, Tony is suddenly and violently pulled forward and then up and out of his bed by his arms. Absolutely petrified, Tony screams as he realizes just what has taken place. He then is further bewildered as he looks down at his wrists. There on both of them were 5 distinct finger markings, as if someone or something had grabbed him. But the outline themselves weren't just there. These outlines looked like they were burns, as if the fingers themselves had been seared into his flesh. Blisters were now starting to form where each invisible hand had been. As he tries to come to terms with this terrifying ordeal, Deb still refuses to believe that it has anything to do with Sallie. She thinks that his lack of sleep from being a new father and working the overnight shift have started to get to him. However, upon seeing the blisters, she's almost in a sense of denial, saying that surely the spirit of a 7-year-old girl would not be able to pull a grown man out of a bed or leave such marks. But if she somehow did, what was the message that she was trying to convey? Given everything that had taken place, a resentment began to build within Tony towards his wife. Accompanying this, he began to hear whispers on almost a daily basis. This would typically occur when he would lay down during the day to try and sleep, so he could get back up and work at the grain elevator. To him, the whispers did not sound like that of a child at all, but rather like 3 low-voiced people speaking to one another. They would also seem so close, as if they were talking simultaneously, directly into his ears. During one particularly scary experience involving the whispering, Tony also begins to see items near the bed float and rotate by themselves, as if suspended by an invisible force. As he screams, wanting all of it to stop, he is greeted by his wife. After explaining what he had just experienced, unfortunately, she doesn't believe him, given what he had been saying, that he had been seeing shadowy figures, hearing whispers, having nightmares as she perceived them. She thought that lack of sleep and stress was causing him to make things up. Tony is starting to believe that whatever force that haunts the house is targeting him, that it's attempting to manipulate his feelings. Coming to terms with this, he also realizes just how hard it's becoming to hide his growing resentment towards Deborah. He keeps having feelings of a dark rage well up inside him, feelings that he's worried could turn violent. In his own words, "These feelings were not like me. I love her so much, and I would never do anything to hurt her. But the longer we were there, the stronger these feelings were becoming." Tony, of course, wasn't the only one to notice these changes. Deborah noticed them too. There had been a large shift in his demeanor and attitude. He seemed angry, short-fused, and argumentative. The couple began to fight almost daily, which hadn't been like them at all in the past. The Pickmans decide that they want to reach back out to Barbara for another consultation to see if they could potentially gain any new information on the presence that seemed to be everywhere and yet nowhere at the same time. In due time, Barbara again would visit them, and upon her arrival, would be told just how things had developed. She attempts to contact Sallie once again. After she believes she's made contact with her, she then begins to sense a second entity. This one, however, is much older and seems to refuse to interact with her. She believes that this adult entity is a female and the one that has been targeting Tony, and that Sallie has been taking the blame. However, she comes to the conviction that whatever is happening within the home is beyond her expertise. What she does offer, though, is that she would contact a very qualified group of paranormal investigators. Tony's reaction at first is harsh, and in his own words once again. At first I was like, no way. We live in a small town. We'd be the laughingstock. If it wasn't a spirit in the house, then the only other thing that I could think it could be was the devil. And that scared me to death. After discussing the matter further with his wife and Barbara, he finally agrees to give the group a try. Within days, the paranormal group would arrive. The group is led by, at that time, world-renowned medium and paranormal researcher Peter James. In his words, a ghost is the ethereal double of its physical counterpart. We become a ghost dependent on the circumstances in which we die. If we die untimely, tragically, or violently, then we are rendered a ghost. I prefer not knowing any details about any specific haunting in which I investigate. It's my job to identify what's causing the activity. Not being informed of the information previously, only that the family was young and had a young boy. As he sits in the living room and speaks with the Pickmans, he asks them if they had a young daughter as well, perhaps of 7 or 8 years old. Telling him no, Peter remarked that it was strange because when he arrived, he saw such a young girl staring at them from one of the upstairs windows. Starting to explore the home, Peter begins to sense that there are 2 entities. One that is a child, and the other, an older adult woman who is very powerful. Upon asking the name of the entities out loud, he would reply with, "Sallie, it's good to meet you." As he embarks up the stairs, he makes his way into the Pickman's master bedroom and starts feeling the presence of the older female. As he steps further into the room, with his crew and the Pickmans behind him, Peter is suddenly thrown back against the door, and almost simultaneously, Tony begins to scream in pain. "My back," he says. Debbie lifts up his shirt and sees that once again, his back is covered in fresh scratches, deep ones, to the point to where they drew blood. Peter is astonished. He now knows that his older woman's presence is not a positive one, telling everyone not to let the entity know that they are afraid of it. They reluctantly press on. The crew spends the rest of the day investigating the home, and during this time, Peter once again begins walking back upstairs, as if something or someone was calling out to him, and it's here that he begins to have a vision. In his vision, he's taken back into the past, and he begins to see the spirits as they were in life. He believed that the home was once the home and practice of a medical physician. His housekeeper and her daughter lived there with him as well. The housekeeper was also his mistress, and the daughter was also his. The housekeeper was African American, and their daughter, half. And in such racially divided times, the affair and their secret child were kept hidden. Sallie was her name, and she was their 7-year-old daughter. Peter believed that Sallie had contracted pneumonia, and her father, although a doctor, was unable to save her. Although the secret family and Sallie's death are tragic, Peter tells the Pickmans that it's not fair for them to be victimized by the dead in their own home, that in order to rid themselves of this torment, that they must cleanse the house, that they were in control, but it was ultimately up to them to restore order. and with these words of advice, he and his crew would depart. The Pickmans decide that they will stay in the house and will do their best to set the rules and stand their ground. Several weeks pass, and despite their best efforts, the atmosphere has only grown heavier, the torment even worse, especially for Tony. His sleep has become even more scarce, and his thoughts grow more and more evil. He can't shake the angry feelings and is becoming more worried that he may end up harming his wife and or himself, that he feels as if this darkness is slowly consuming him. He finally confronts Deborah and explains exactly how he feels, that he believes that if they don't leave the house, that something horrible may end up happening. Finally understanding the pressure her husband was under, she agrees with him and begins looking at ads for a new home for the family. In the meantime, Tony attempts to sleep due to working the graveyard shift. As he lays in bed, tossing and turning, he is once again consumed by the ever-growing and almost overwhelming thoughts of wanting to harm his family. Feeling as if he was under attack, he rushes out of the room and yells for Deborah. He tells her to grab Taylor, that they were leaving, that he had finally reached his breaking point. Fortunately for the Pickman family, they find a house shortly after leaving what would become known as the Sallie house. The heaviness, the anger, and the spiritual torment would cease. But given what the Pickmans had gone through, it's also important to note that the Sallie house certainly has a dark and checkered history that existed long before their arrival. Originally built in 1867 by the Finney family, it served as a generational home. Several generations of the family lived there between 1867 and 1939. During that time, 5 confirmed deaths occurred within the family. Michael Finney in 1872, Charles, Catherine's father, the wife of Michael Finney, Kate Finney, and Richard Finney in 1874, and finally Agnes Finney in 1939. There are multiple stories about Sallie, that she passed away from pneumonia, the origin I previously told in this story, but there is also another which I will tell you now. The story goes that Charles Finney, the son of Michael and Kate, became a doctor and made the house both his residence and his practice. The front served as an office space and an examination room, while the family lived upstairs. One day, a frantic mother arrived carrying her 6-year-old daughter, Sallie, who had collapsed from severe abdominal pain. The doctor quickly diagnosed her with an appendicitis, and new surgery was urgent. Without delay, he prepped Sallie for the operation using ether, the anesthesia that was available at that time. Tragically, Sallie wasn't fully unconscious, and as the first incision was made, she screamed and thrashed in pain. Despite the doctor's efforts to restrain her and administer more anesthesia, Sallie's condition worsened. She would go into shock and ultimately die on the operating table. Her final moments filled with agony and fear. The home left the Finney family in 1939 and passed through various owners before becoming a rental property. At least one tenant may have been involved in satanic rituals, which some believe contributed to the sinister activity associated with the house. Paranormal activity wasn't reported until Tony and Deborah Pickman began renting the house. Intrigued by the paranormal claims, the property owner Les Smith investigated and discovered a pentagram beneath the basement floorboards. Many believe that this may have been evidence of rituals that summoned something demonic. Subsequent investigations revealed blood evidence in the master bedroom closet and tattered clothing in the attic. After the Pickmans, however, reports of electronic malfunctions, EVPs, physical attacks, and other poltergeist activity have further cemented the house's reputation as a hotspot for paranormal occurrences. I've visited the Sallie house myself. It was actually my very first paranormal investigation, albeit amateur at best at that time. It certainly was an excellent experience getting into the field, and although for a variety of reasons, I don't think the Sallie house is as haunted as it once was. However, we did experience a few strange things. When I went with a few friends of mine, we arrived in the summer of 2022, and it was easily close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and the home, being very old, didn't have great AC, as we would later learn. However, when we stepped inside for the first time, we were taken aback because it was absolutely frigid by comparison, but this blast of cold air only lasted several seconds. The temperature did not fluctuate like it had then for the rest of the night. I also remember personally checking the thermostat, and it was set at like 85 or something crazy, so the actual air conditioning wasn't even on until we turned it on. So I found that weird, to say the least. The record player and TV turned on by themselves multiple times throughout the night, which, of course, we found odd. The old record player didn't have any sort of a timer whatsoever, and given the age of the CRTV as well, it didn't appear to have a timer that we could find that would have caused this. Besides some strange feelings throughout the day and then into the night, we didn't get a ton of interaction. Through the kitchen, although it was blocked off, we decided to look past it and go down the stairs and witness the pentagram, which for one reason or another had been burned out on the floor in the basement. And I do have to say that the basement itself was extremely creepy. You could feel some very bad vibes originating from there. So I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of black magic ritual or rituals were potentially done down there. I almost forgot, but as I was reviewing the original footage, I did find that we did capture an EVP, and I'll go ahead and play that for you now. With black mold in the walls of this very old home, we decided not to stay overnight because you weren't supposed to sleep there anyways. Having taken plenty of video and photo evidence, we began to place things we had taken from Sallie's room back. And when my friend, whose name is also Cody, but with a C, placed one of those magic 8-ball toys back on the bed, a touch-activated toy decided to go off on its own. In this particular one, you had to tap its head fairly hard to get it to go off. I remember all of us being freaked out by it. I remember it was extremely foggy that night, which added to the mystique, especially of my first paranormal adventure for sure. Or one that didn't occur, of course, in a home that I lived in. We took one last look at the Sallie house before departing, and to our shock, all the lights decided to turn on within the home. From what we could see, both the upstairs and the main floor lights. The breaker was the original, so this too seems rather impossible to have just occurred on its own, without some kind of ghostly intervention. Our code only worked for entering, so we weren't able to get back into the home following this. But granted, it was 2 a.m. at this point, so we decided to drive home. We would hit a pothole, and one of our tires kept going flat on our way home, which definitely was not fun. All around, I would return knowing what I know now, and having much better equipment and resources, and far more experienced friends by my side. I think we would catch a lot more. It's my belief that for one reason or another, that the Sallie houses may be dormant or not as haunted as it once was, and that it's still very possible that a demonic presence still slithers within its walls, masquerading itself as the soul of a little girl named Sallie. I took the original documentary down due to some copyrighted image issues earlier this year, as well as the origin story that I had originally made. But I think I did a far better job this time anyways. but some of the photos and footage I've shown you while explaining my trip there, I originally took and filmed myself. The Sallie house was made famous in part by the old show Sightings, who filmed a segment for an episode on it, which was picked up by local and then later national media, as well as Deborah Pickman would go on to write a book, which I've found to be a great read, called The Sallie House Haunting, which you can find on Amazon, and I'll link it below. With that being said, would you like to see me return to the Sallie house for a proper investigation? And what are your thoughts on the case? What do you think is still haunting this Topeka, Kansas house? Let me know down in the comments below. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video around. All this stuff helps me out tremendously. I did want to take a moment to thank you guys for always having my back. I truly need the support and encouragement some days, and I can't emphasize that enough. I have revamped my store with some better merch designs, and I'm running a bundle deal on my 2 books that if you buy them together, you save some money, and I ship those out myself as well as sign them for you. I did want to mention that if you want to watch all my content ad-free, you can join via YouTube memberships by hitting join on my channel, or visit patreon.com/mystery archives to become a patron. Again, thank you all so very much for everything. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time. Searching for the ideal place to settle, a young family moves into a new home, believing their prayers have been answered. However, just a year later, they find themselves gone, never to return. They are left questioning just who truly answered those prayers and what exactly invaded their lives. An enigmatic entity that perpetrated violence and terror upon them. The untold story of the Black Monk of Pontefract. In September 1954, Bill Farah and his wife Barbara moved into a new home in the historic market town of Pontefract, England. They were a young family with a 2-year-old daughter named Jane. At 30 East Drive, with its 3 bedrooms, this should have been their ideal home. Yet less than a year later, they moved out. The Farahs quickly had grown terrified of their new home. Their dream had seemingly become a nightmare. Objects moved on their own. Voices echoed in empty rooms and halls. And large rips and tears appeared on their furniture out of nowhere, forming an ominous atmosphere that began to smother them all. These events would culminate one night when Bill and Barbara found their daughter crying, her small face inexplicably covered in scratches, small trickles of blood dripping from each slash, with no rational cause. The family had no pets to blame for their daughter Jane's injuries, and even after they placed cotton mitts on her hands, the wounds continued to appear. The poor child cried every night, leaving her parents scared and confused about what to do and just what could be happening. One day, Barbara frantically rushed upstairs at the piercing sound of her child's cries. What she discovered would shake her to her core. She would find a pillow placed over Jane's face, as if someone or something was attempting to extinguish her young life. At that moment, the answer became clear. The family had to leave, and leave immediately. So they did. They would leave the house and its dark forces. Friends and neighbors of the Farahs, the Pritchard family, would be convinced by the Farah family to switch homes with them, ultimately leaving them at the mercy of whatever malevolent forces that dwelled within the walls. August of 1966. The Pritchards would move into the old Farah residence. Their new home was quite a bit larger than their last and seemed to be the answer to their prayers. The Pritchard family consisted of Father Joe, Mother Jean, and their small children, daughter Diane and son Philip. Shortly after moving in, however, the same strange occurrences began to manifest. Strange sounds, such as banging and knocking, began to be heard, reverberating throughout the house with no rational origin. Horrid smells began to waft throughout the house as well, again with no explanation as to what could be causing them. The children first, and then the parents, began to be terrified by a shadowy, dark figure that began to make its presence known at various hours of the day and night, seemingly watching their every move. Jean Pritchard ended up giving the creepy figure several nicknames. She called it Fred and Mr. Nobody. But history would come to know the entity by a very different and certainly a scarier name by most standards: the Black Monk of Pontefract. The Pritchards, noticing that these happenings were far from normal, approached their former neighbors, the Farahs, and asked them if they had ever experienced anything weird when they had lived there. The Farahs would say no. In August of 1980, the Pritchard family had long been suffering from the haunting. Colin Wilson, a well-known writer on subjects including the paranormal and mysticism, visited the family after being tipped off by a local historian, a man named Tom Cuniff. Cuniff had stumbled across newspaper clippings from the late 1960s, alleging that a Pontefract family had experienced poltergeist phenomena. As he dug deeper into the history of the area, he discovered a rather disturbing story, one that he believed could be connected to the haunting itself. In the 16th century, a monk was executed for the brutal assault and murders of several young victims. Upon reading that the family was being stalked by a shadowy robed figure, he put two and two together. During his research, upon discovering that the family still lived in the same house, Cuniff contacted Wilson, prompting Wilson to journey to Yorkshire to interview them, to see if perhaps they could get to the bottom of things. With the information provided by Wilson's records, a more detailed version of the haunting chronologically begins to emerge. According to Wilson's records, in August 1966, on that Thursday, most of the family, Joe Pritchard, his wife Jean, and their 12-year-old daughter Diane, were on holiday in Devon, leaving their 15-year-old son Philip and Jean's mother Sarah Scholes and her sister Marie at home. Philip had reached the age when family holidays had lost their appeal, so as most adolescents do, he spent much time to himself, reading in the family garden. That Thursday, while outside, Philip returned indoors to get himself a drink. As he did this, he noticed something bizarre. His grandmother, sitting in the living room, heavily focused on her knitting, was completely oblivious to a gray-hued cloud floating around her. Philip would later say that it was a chalk-like, powdery substance, and from this cloud, it appeared to be falling from, not from the ceiling. The top half of the room was perfectly clear, and yet curious dust seemed to materialize from nowhere. Weirded out, Philip returned to the kitchen, only to find several large pools of water covering the floor, with no apparent origin. Then, heading back to the living room, he saw the dust, or cloud, had continued to fall like a miniature snowstorm forming a fine white layer on the furniture, and even on top of his grandmother. Rushing to another room to get his aunt's attention, he would bring her out into the living room, where she would notice the very same thing. Unsure of just what it could be, she called to her mother to gain her attention and get her out of whatever the cloud or strange powder seemed to be. Heading towards the kitchen to get her cleaned up, she too would notice the puddles of water everywhere. As Marie tried to mop up in the kitchen, new puddles supposedly manifested. She would pull up the linoleum to reveal no leak underneath, and the water wasn't falling from above them either. So just like the dust in the other room, the puddles seemed to have come from nowhere. The odd drama intensified when, after the water supply to the house was turned off by a helpful neighbor, the water company was called to the property. Pipes were checked, the linoleum lifted once again, and drains examined, but nothing was found to be broken or blocked. The water companies suggested that some strange condensation caused by the summer weather might be responsible, but after about an hour, they left, and the mysterious puddles stopped appearing. However, before the day ended, more odd happenings were reported. Sugar and tea leaves were emptied from their dispensers in the kitchen and sprinkled all across the countertops. Cupboards vibrated and shook, and loud bangs were heard from upstairs. A plant, which was usually located at the foot of the staircase, was also mysteriously transported halfway up, its pot found separately on the landing above. Unable to tolerate the house any longer, Philip and his grandmother left with and would spend the night with Aunt Marie. Vic Kelly, Marie's husband, unhappy with the strange situation, reportedly phoned the police to check on the house. With Vic present, upon law enforcement's arrival, everything seemed normal, with no intruder being found. Nothing else seemed out of place either, until they found a glass shattered on the floor. In one of Joe and Jean Pritchard's wedding photos, the photo itself slashed from side to side, as if with a sharp knife. Chilled to his core, Vic simply followed the officers back outside of the home and then closed the front door of 30 East Drive and returned to his home. When Jean, Joe, and Diane returned from their holiday, Sarah relayed the unsettling events to them. There was a disbelief at first, but as she spoke, everyone would hear 3 loud and distinct bangs reverberate throughout the home. Then, a cold wind blew through the house, almost as if the entity had perhaps left. But that was far from what would happen. It was merely seemingly taking a break. According to testimonies recorded by Colin Wilson, the haunting truly resumed for the Pritchards in 1968, when Jean decided to redecorate Diane's bedroom. As I've noticed while studying numerous other hauntings, construction or redecoration, or essentially changing what once was, seems to be a way to disturb or wake up whatever forces, good or bad, that could be dwelling within a space. Following this, mysterious temperature changes began to be experienced. Inexplicable bangs and knocks once again plagued the family, and daily household items, such as in one instance, a paintbrush, began to be flung across the room by unseen hands. One just so happened to barely miss Jean's face by mere inches during the remodel itself. It's even been claimed that Mrs. Pritchard witnessed, in the dim moonlight one night, as she went to the bathroom, a long strip of wallpaper standing on end and swaying like a cobra. When she attempted to grab it, the strip simply fell to the floor, causing a feeling of fear to grip her that one would seldomly experience otherwise. Horrifically, within the same room that was being remodeled, not too long after this occurred, the family vacuum flew into the air, swinging around as if wielded by giant, invisible hands. Screaming, Jean dropped onto all fours and rushed back to her daughter as wallpaper and various objects continued to be thrown towards her. The unseen presence in the house had returned, and it seemed more aggressive than ever, particularly fixated on Diane's bedroom. What followed was described as 9 months of chaos, in which all manner of violent activity was reported. Bangs and thumps echoed from Diane's bedroom with such physical aggression that she occasionally took to sleeping in her parents' room. Ornaments were thrown and levitated, and lights flickered on and off repeatedly. One day, the entire contents of the family's china cabinet were reportedly hurled onto the floor, with not a single precious item being smashed or chipped in the process. One evening, a particularly chilling incident marked an escalation in the severity of the activity. In Diane's room yet again, the lights randomly went out, and a huge shadow appeared on the wall before her. As she witnessed this firsthand in the hallway, while her mother scrambled with a flashlight to try and turn the lights back on. As the teenage girl watched, a heavy oak hall stand floated into the air and rushed towards her with incredible speed. In her attempt to escape, Diane tripped and fell, her back up against the stairs, with the hall stand being thrown on top of her. The weight of the piece of furniture pressed down on her small body, pinning her against the steps. As she struggled to breathe and free herself, another heavy object, a sewing machine that had been on top of the stand, was also thrown onto her. When the lights finally illuminated the scene, her family rushed to help, but the hall stand was too heavy and firmly positioned to move. Jean and Joe struggled to free their daughter, and yet strangely, despite the pressure, Diane was unharmed. The heavy furniture was merely being held in place by some invisible force, enough to keep her trapped, but not to injure her. When instructed to release her, the force seemingly obliged, finally allowing the hall stand and sewing machine to be removed. The poltergeist then seemed particularly fascinated with Diane Pritchard. In addition to the hall stand incident, it was reported that she was tossed from her bed as many as 4 times in a night by the unseen entity. Her bedroom often turned icy cold, and she told her parents it felt as if though someone was present with her, always watching her and lurking just beyond her sight. On one occasion, while standing in the living room combing her hair in front of a mirror, a brass crucifix that she found comfort in with her faith was thrown from a shelf and struck her in the back, sticking to her skin like a magnet. When the crucifix finally fell away, her mother inspected her and discovered a cross-shaped red mark on her skin between her shoulder blades. The mark left reportedly lasted for days, showing the strong force of which it had been thrown with. Before long, the house at 30 East Drive gained quite the local reputation. After being featured in 2 Yorkshire newspapers in September of 1968, people either actively avoided the house or sought to engage with the alleged haunting. Ghost hunters attempted to gain admission into the residence, and it was even reported that a group of students who requested permission to camp in the garden were forced to settle for the large round grass verge in front of the house when Jean Pritchard declined their request. However, even from that distance, the group claimed to still have heard an assortment of bangs and crashes. Along with this newfound fame, it became commonplace for the Pritchards' family's neighbors to experience disturbances within their own homes, as the noises were reportedly that loud, emanating from the Pritchard residence. When all the family's possessions upstairs in the bedrooms were allegedly thrown out of windows and onto the ground below, it was impossible for anyone in the area to deny that something bizarre was happening, something that no one could truly comprehend or truly understand. Eventually, the family began calling their unwanted house guest Mr. Nobody, later nicknaming it Fred. Despite its attempts to force them out, however, the Pritchard family remained. When a local preacher, a man named Reverend Davy, advised the family that something evil lurked in their home and that they should move, Jean reportedly scoffed at him, asking him, "Why should I be driven out of my home by a ghost?" This was certainly a testament to the family's resolve, no doubt. As the disturbances worsened and the activity further intensified, the family yet continued to persevere. Perfectly good and often newly purchased food would spoil, something strange that became a calling card for the entity, as if whatever it was brought death and decay along with it. Aside from spoiling food, Mr. Nobody, as they called it, would also often smear jam on door handles and would often throw toilet paper all over the house. Fine china plates and cups would be thrown onto the floor, sometimes shattered, and other times perfectly fine. But yet, despite being watched by the dark-robed figure that had plagued them for years, and all of its accompanying terror, the family still refused to be chased away, even after both Jean and Joe saw the tall, shadowy figure with a hood standing in their bedroom doorway. They had been in bed when they heard the door creak open, and both turned to see the terrifying apparition. Others reported seeing the tall figure in a long hooded garment as well. At night, frightened family members heard loud, labored breathing outside of their doors. It became clear that Mr. Nobody, or as he was increasingly known as, the monk, was gaining power. It was as if the creature fed off of their fear. The activity would peak yet again one evening when all of the lights went out, and Diane, along with her mother and brother, would experience something dark that none of them would ever forget. As the family huddled together in the dark, trying to find their way around the home, Diane suddenly, as if she had been grabbed by large invisible hands, was forcibly dragged up the stairs by her throat. Colin Wilson, who documented the events in his book, noted that Diane's cardigan was stretched out in front of her, as if the monk was tugging on it with one hand, while gripping her neck with the other. Roused by her screams and gasps for air, Philip and Jean rushed to pull Diane back down the stairs, but they were both repelled, thrown back by what felt like large, clawed hands. Fighting for her life and on the verge of blacking out, as she struggled, Diane fortunately would ultimately be freed, almost as quickly as she had been attacked. Philip later explained that it was as though his thought of trying to touch the presence had caused it to release his sister. When the family inspected the profusely shaking and traumatized girl once the lights turned back on, they would see red hand marks around her neck. To say they were terrified was perhaps an understatement. Although they collectively didn't want to leave their home, they desperately wished for the entity to depart. The family would contact religious figures. They would pray and sprinkle holy water throughout the entire property. But despite their best efforts, nothing seemed to work. In fact, these actions seemed to exacerbate the disturbances, almost as if they were angering the entity itself with their efforts. One of Joe's friends, recently returned from Scotland, recounted how people there hung garlic over doors and windows to keep out spirits. Fascinatingly, when the Pritchards followed suit, the activity diminished, eventually disappearing altogether. Thus, what began for the Pritchards in August of 1966 ceased after 2 years, by May of 1969. When Colin met with the family in 1980, he reported no ongoing activity. Although it's not exactly clear when, the home would eventually find its way into the hands of a man who's all too familiar with the paranormal, an investigator named Richard Estep. If these accounts are true, the events at 30 East Drive appear to be a classic case of poltergeist activity, similar to many other documented instances of spirit hauntings, like the Enfield poltergeist in 1977. The activity is often centered around adolescents, and there were adolescents present in this case as well. First, a 15-year-old Philip in 1966, and then an aged 15 Diane in 1968. Wilson oddly noted that nothing seemed to occur in the house while Diane was at school. Objects, even large and heavy items like solid oak furniture, were said to move on their own accord. Food, too, appearing irresistible to the entity. Food at 30 East Drive, besides rotting and being moved and displaced, would also mysteriously manifest bite marks. The appearance of puddles of water on the kitchen floor at the beginning of the Pontefract case is also a hallmark of other poltergeist occurrences. The respected parapsychology researcher Guy Lyon Playfair suggested that the neat puddles found in the Pritchard home and others allegedly haunted by poltergeists might be some form of condensation of the energy used by the entities. The activity disappearing as the children transition from adolescence to adulthood is also consistent with other poltergeist cases. Yet despite these claims, many argue that activity at 30 East Drive never truly ceased, asserting that it predates the Pritchards and their teenage children by over a decade. At the beginning of this story, I referenced a testimony from the Farah family and their 2-year-old daughter, Jane, who had lived at the property before the Pritchards. This particular testimony was presented in the 2019 book, The Black Monk of Pontefract, and alleges horrific events, including the baby girl covered in scratch marks, and told of the attempted suffocation of the same child by what is presumed to be the same black monk entity that haunted the Pritchards. However, it's peculiar that Jean and Joe didn't report similar experiences regarding their young children, having taken over 30 East Drive from the Farahs in the mid-1950s. By the time of the alleged onset of activity in August of 1966, they'd been in the house for several years. Yet as far as we know, it didn't target them in the same way. But why would this be the case? Perhaps the poltergeist, or whatever it was, maybe a demonic entity, was in a state of paranormal hibernation for a decade or more, and was woken up, so to speak, for one reason or another. Yet this inconsistency becomes all the more intriguing when one examines the 2019 book, The Black Monk of Pontefract. Indeed, the authors of the text, paranormal researcher Richard Estep and the current owner of 30 East Drive, film producer Bill Bungie, argue that Bill Farah and his family represent a previously unknown origin of the Pontefract case. In their book, this new starting point is ultimately used to support their conclusion that the Black Monk of Pontefract is less likely to be a poltergeist and more likely to be a demonic entity, one that remains on the property To this day, it is indisputable that the Farah family not only existed, but also lived at the property before the Pritchards, and there is ample record to prove this. In fact, the author's claims were allegedly presented from Mr. Farah himself, but the family moved into 30 East Drive in September of 1954 and would leave within a year due to horrific activity. In the aforementioned book, the reader is treated to tales of the Dark Monk, which are accompanied by many photographs of dark demonic entities captured within the walls of the home. Does this house still exist? It most certainly does. Today, the former council house is just as famous as it is creepy. Those who visit the site have documented many scratches and suffocating sensations, as well as capturing numerous photographs of the alleged black monk entity itself. These alleged pieces of evidence, accompanied with the two families who lived there and the current owner's experiences, we are left with more questions than answers. A few of my questions are these. Just who was this black monk? If they did exist, what drove them to such madness to abuse the young? Are they perhaps a man of God at one point, and ultimately corrupted by darkness? The same darkness that would corrupt them in life and consume them in death. Perhaps this is what led to the violent manifestations that affected all of those who crossed the threshold of 30 East Drive. Was the entity a malevolent human spirit, a demonic entity, or a textbook case of poltergeist activity? All questions we truly may never have the answers to. But one thing is certain. There was something that called the house at 30 East Drive in Pontefract home. Something that was not of this world. A dark, robed, and lurking presence that stalked those who dwelt there in the land of the living. Perhaps it still lurks there, stalking, watching, and waiting for the right time to awake and wreak havoc upon those of us who still breathe and whose hearts still beat. In the quiet rural town of Lamar, Arkansas, tucked among cotton fields and crumbling barns, stands a white colonial farmhouse that once promised a dream life for the Shea family. Instead, it delivered something else entirely. Something cold, intelligent, and malevolent. For months in 2002 to 2003, this unsuspecting home became the stage for one of the most terrifying and well-documented hauntings in modern American history. A descent into chaos, violent manifestations, shadow figures, and so much more. This is the terrifying story of the Shea family haunting, also known as a haunting in Arkansas. And this is not a story you want to listen to alone or in the dark. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, but what happens when it turns on you? The Ozark River Valley was once considered the gateway to the West. Perhaps more so now, it is a gateway to the great beyond, a place where life and death collide, and sometimes, just maybe, don't always stay separate from one another. In October of 2003, hard-working couple Ben and Jamie Shea searched for a new place to live. Originally from Little Rock, their search takes them to Markham, Arkansas. They're hoping to find a house that they can make a home for themselves, as well as their young children. As the couple drives to look at their next prospect purchase, they are taken back by what they see standing before them. There in front of their eyes lies a historical home. In Jamie's words from later interviews, the house was absolutely beautiful and large. It had old trees all around it, and it was just the picture of the house that I had been wanting all my life. The house the couple is looking at buying is indeed old. Built in the 1700s, it is one of the oldest in the state. Together, Ben and Jamie seem to collectively fall in love with it. They can already imagine raising their 3 children upon its grounds. Ben, who had grown up playing in the woods, truly wanted to share that with his children as well. The house was in the perfect location for the couple, directly in between 2 towns the two separately worked in. If they lived here, their commutes would be significantly reduced, and therefore, they could spend more time together as a family. Deciding to take a closer look, the Shays step inside the home. But as their feet cross the threshold, little do they know that something else is taking a closer look at them as well, perhaps from the protection of the shadows. Regardless, the couple loves what they see. In the words of Jamie Shay in later interviews, "I knew as soon as I saw that house that we had to have it. It seemed as if it spoke directly to their souls, almost as if something supernatural was drawing them in." Together, they continue to examine the rest of the home before fully committing to purchasing. But as they ascend the stairs and take a look inside the first room, they perhaps aren't quite as sure as they once were. Inside the bedroom lies something strange. There's a fireplace at its center, and on and within it are all sorts of strange markings and graffiti. A local boy named Clayton, who had passed away in an accident's name, was spray painted across the stone. Pentagrams were carved and painted on it, as well as the names the couple didn't seem to recognize. Names that appeared to be in a language that neither of them knew. But despite being creeped out at first, the two thought that perhaps some teens had broken into the property at some point during its vacancy and committed the defacing. So with that conclusion, they decide that the deal is too good to pass up. They decide to make an offer on the home, and to their surprise, it's accepted almost immediately. The couple are absolutely elated. The deal they got on the home seems to be too good to be true, and perhaps for one reason or another, it truly was. Within several weeks, the Shays, wife Jamie, husband Ben, and 3 young children, 8-month-old Jackson, 5-year-old Bridger, and 11-year-old daughter Tori, move into their colonial home to begin a new chapter in their lives. But little did they know that something else, something much more sinister, may just be beginning. The family quickly settles into a busy routine. They decide to hire an experienced and well-reviewed babysitter to watch Jackson during the day, a woman named Molly. Ben, who works 3rd shift, sleeps throughout the morning, then wakes up to attend class, and then heads to work after. One morning as he sleeps in his bed, shortly after hiring the sitter, he is suddenly woken up by the sound of his baby son screaming through the baby monitor he's placed beside his pillow on his nightstand. As he sleepily calls out to Molly to take care of Jackson, he is met with no response from her. Meanwhile, the screams of the child only continue to grow in intensity. Growing frustrated, Ben sits up to go and see just what exactly was going on. He continues to call out to Molly, but is met with no responses. As the infant screams erupt out of the baby monitor, Ben seeks out Molly within the house, but his calls are only continuing to be in vain. Molly is seemingly not around and is not answering him, yet his son's cries grow ever louder. As he makes his way into the nursery whilst carrying the monitor, the screams suddenly stop as he breaches the room's doorway. Then, a deep chill manifests down his spine. The room itself is empty. The crib is barren. There's not a single soul dwelling within the room. Something was very wrong here. Confused and a bit freaked out, but not one to be the superstitious type, Ben then heads downstairs and continues to call out for Molly to try and get to the bottom of whatever was going on. It's when he gets into the living room that he finds a note on the coffee table. The note reads, "I went shopping and took Jackson with me. We'll be back soon." In later interviews, Ben would say that, "I knew for a fact that I wasn't dreaming. There was a baby crying on that monitor, and yet there was nobody else home. It was a very creepy moment." Unsure of what to make of the whole event, he decides to keep things to himself. Several nights later, as Ben heads to work at the hospital, and a large harvest moon hangs high over the Shea residence, something not of this world seemed to be permeating the air within its walls. Bridger Shea is suddenly woken up out of a sound sleep by a chorus of strange voices emanating from nowhere, yet they seem to be everywhere. A cold gust of wind accompanies them, seemingly also with no origin. The young man is absolutely terrified as things are blown around his room. He gets up and begins running towards his parents' room. Jamie, too, is suddenly woken up, but by the fear-stricken pleas of her young son. Believing that perhaps he had just had a nightmare, she brings the scared boy into bed with her to console him. Trying to quell his fears, she gets up out of bed and decides to take a look around the house. Her first thought was that perhaps one of the other children had left the television on in the living room, but upon examining it, it was turned off. She listens for any other signs of activity, but doesn't hear anything. Tired, she returns to bed and attempts to get more sleep. The night, however, or what dwelled within it, seemingly had other plans. Tori Shea is woken up by the sound of toys being played with. Confused, she glances around her room as her clock reads 3 a.m. on the nearby nightstand. The sounds seem to be originating from her brother Bridger's room, just across the hallway from hers. Calling out to him, thinking that perhaps he had woken up and was entertaining himself, but at her expense, she tells him that he needs to go back to bed. As she opens the door to the young boy's room, she sees what appears to be practically any and all of his toys on the floor, and all of them are acting on their own accord and operating as if unseen hands are meddling with them. What strikes fear into her heart, however, is that her brother is nowhere to be seen. Stepping back into the hallway, she is met with a rush of cold wind and hears a chorus of voices that she doesn't recognize. It was as if multiple people with differing tonalities were speaking over one another, and the cacophony enveloped the atmosphere around her. Unsure and freaked out to say the least, she decides to run back to her bedroom. Shutting the door behind her, she runs to her bed and quickly hides underneath the covers. It takes her quite some time, but she eventually manages to fall back asleep. The following morning, as the children wait outside to head to school, they begin to talk among each other about the previous night's events. Tori, who perhaps was initially trying to rationalize what she had seen, had thought that Bridger had hid from her when she had come to confront him about playing in the middle of the night. When she asked the young boy why he hid and why he had been awake, he seems confused. He quickly tells her that he had slept with their mom and father and hadn't been in his room at all at that time. Further confused, Tori asks him just why he had gone to sleep in their mother's bed and hadn't stayed in his own. And with this question, the boy goes silent. Upon further prodding, he tells his sister that he had heard lots of scary voices and that it had got windy, so he ran. Being a good older sister, Tori decides not to further add to her brother's fear. She can tell that he genuinely meant what he was saying. She doesn't tell him that she too experienced the very same things he had just described during the night. Later that evening, before heading to work, Ben spends quality time with Bridger. The two lay in the boy's bed as Ben reads his son a children's book to relax him. For now, Ben is stuck working later hours while he earns his degree. He hopes that in due time, once the process is over, that he'll be able to adjust his hours so he can spend more time with his family. As he heads back out into the darkness of night to provide for them, something lurks within the shadows of the Shea household. As the children sleep, Jamie is busy crunching numbers and budgeting. As she clicks away on her calculator and jots down notes in a notebook, her concentration is abruptly broken by the sounds of children giggling. Considering the hour, she knows that her children should not be awake, let alone playing. So, she sets things down and decides to investigate. Glancing towards the stairs from the kitchen where she had been, she continues to hear her children giggle and laugh, and then also begins to hear loud thumping sounds as if they were running up and down the stairs in rapid succession. She calls out to them multiple times, yet is met with no response. Finally, deciding to get up and go scold her children for not only being up past their bedtime, but also for running around the house like gremlins, Jamie heads towards the stairs where the sounds are originating from. However, instead of coming face to face with ornery children, she's instead met with nothing but the now cold, dead silence of the house. The thumping, giggling, and horseplay sounds have seemingly ceased out of nowhere. Finding this unnerving to say the least, Jamie then quietly makes her way upstairs to check on them. She's very surprised, given what she had just heard, to find them all asleep in their beds. With a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach growing, the concerned mother decides to double-check the house for safety. All windows and doors are locked, and there are no other souls present within the house. This very creepy happening would be far from the last. In the coming days and headed into the following weekend, Jamie and the children have continued to experience strange activity in the home. Jamie decides that she can no longer keep the details to herself, and although she doesn't want to add anything further to her husband's already full plate at this point, she feels like she must talk to him about what's been taking place. Beginning to share the various occurrences, including one that had taken place that very day. Their babysitter had heard crying on the baby monitor, and upon checking it, there was no child weeping. Ben looks up from his studying and freezes as he hears his wife's words. He then tells her that several weeks ago, he too had heard the cries of a child, and upon checking, discovered that his child and their babysitter weren't even physically in the house. And what puts a chill shivering down his spine is that he had kept the experience a secret from everyone. Almost as soon as the words leave his lips, the sound of banging starts to fill the stillness of the house. Thinking at first that it was their children, but quickly realizing that the sounds were coming from downstairs, Ben springs into action and begins heading towards where the sounds are coming from. The sounds themselves cease upon his approach. Then, to add to his suspicion, he goes and checks on the kids and finds each one sound asleep in their beds. As he descends the stairs and approaches his wife in the living room, he seems visibly stricken and confused. He seems to know that something deep down is wrong with the entire situation, but tries to take a rational approach. He starts trying to explain away the sounds as an old house settling. Whether this was a way to help calm his wife or himself is unclear. It at least works for Ben in the short term. He somewhat convinces himself that it was indeed the house settling and starts to head off for bed. Jamie, however, is feeling very differently about the situation. In later interviews, she would say, "It was at that moment that I truly began to feel like we might be living in a haunted house." The following morning, consumed by a newly found interest to discover just what she and her family might be dealing with, Jamie decides to visit the local library. While browsing the aisles, she accumulates a good amount of books on ghosts and hauntings. As she checks out at the front, the librarian who's assisting her can't help but notice just what she's interested in. She then tells Jamie that she herself grew up in a haunted house when she was younger. Jamie then asks the woman if the home was there in the local area or somewhere else. The woman, whom she had never met before, then tells her that it was indeed in her town. She then tells her the address. Jamie's eyes swell larger than the harvest moon when the words leave the woman's lips. It is the very same address that she and her family now live in. The woman then begins to fill Jamie in on the conclusions that she and her family had come to while living in the residence. They had believed that a young boy had accidentally fallen to his death from the second room in the middle of the upstairs section of the house, the room now that her son Bridger occupies. The drive home for Jamie is surreal. The following morning, as she waits for her husband to get home so she can tell him what she had been told regarding the house and their situation, she begins to worry just how living in such an environment could affect her children. Upon Ben's arrival, she begins to divulge to him just exactly what she had learned. Ben began to believe that perhaps, if this haunting was indeed real, that it would quiet down eventually and wouldn't have a large impact on their lives. As the Christmas season approaches, the paranormal activity within the Shea household seems to dwindle to a drop of its former self. One cold and snowy night, as Jamie researches on the family computer, she suddenly begins to feel as if she's being watched. Out of the glare of her monitor, she sees a dark, shadowy figure linger behind her. Startled, she turns around. Almost as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Mortified, Jamie rushes out of the room and runs to the nearest phone to call Ben. As he picks up on the other line, he is hearing his wife be hysterical. Becoming frustrated because he can't simply leave work on a whim, Ben is saddened about the whole situation. In later interviews, Jamie would say this: "That was the first time I ever truly felt scared or threatened by whatever was in the house. It most certainly did not feel like the energy of a small child." The following day, Jamie would return to the library, seeking the woman that she had spoken to in regards to her current predicament and happening within the house. But as she glances around the library's front desk, she doesn't see her. She asks another librarian just where the woman was. She was then informed that she no longer worked for the library. Digging further as to what happened, Jamie is told that the woman left with no warning and no contact information and no forwarding address. Albeit it could have been a very unfortunate coincidence, the timing of it all just seems to add to the suspicion that something otherworldly was influencing the situation the family now found themselves in. Something dark. Over the next several weeks, the presence within the Shea home has seemingly continued to go dormant, yet the heaviness of its existence continued to plague Jamie. In another interview later on, she would say that, "I really had an eerie, sick feeling in my stomach. I really dreaded going home, and it was starting to not feel like my home anymore." One day, after picking up Tori from a friend's house, as she's driving through a construction zone, Jamie suddenly sees a flash before her eyes. Within the blink of an eye, she hits a pothole and crashes her vehicle. Upon coming to, she begins to panic. She sees that her daughter is pinned face down underneath the minivan. Emergency personnel rush Tori to the hospital after arrival on the scene. She's in critical condition. Ben soon arrives to greet his wife at the hospital, and the two weep and hold each other. The doctors believed that Tori had a broken back, but to what extent was yet to be seen. They were unsure if she would survive, and if she did survive, they weren't sure if she'd ever be able to walk again. In a miraculous turn of events, just 2 weeks after the accident, the hospital releases Tori just in time for Christmas. Although she will be bedridden for several months, she's expected to make a full recovery. Several more weeks pass, and with them the holidays. Jamie, who had taken a leave of absence from work to be able to care for her recovering daughter, barely notices any paranormal activity taking place in the house. As she gets Tori to bed one night, she is called to by her son. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, he tells his mother that people are talking in his room, and it's keeping him from sleeping. Jamie goes to check on baby Jackson. She soon finds him fast asleep in his crib, fortunately unaffected by the sounds or people talking. However, upon exiting his room, she makes her way towards Bridger's. As she gathers some stuffed toys for her son to sleep with that night, she can't shake the eerie feeling as if someone or something is watching her. As she makes her way back into her and Ben's bedroom, she tells Ben that she no longer feels safe within their home. The couple are torn, though, because they know that they can't go anywhere until Tori is fully recovered due to her condition. That, before anything, was their number one priority. They didn't want to have to focus on selling and then buying a home amidst her healing journey. After drifting off to dreamland, as a large amber moon hangs in the sky overhead, something sinister stirred within the walls of the Shea family home. Jamie is woken up to the strange sensation of her hair being pulled and toyed with. At first, thinking it was her husband, she asked him to please knock it off. Her words then wake Ben up, who has no idea what she's talking about. Then, as if invisible hands are grabbing it, she feels her hair being toyed with yet again, but this time, she's staring directly at her husband. She knows for a fact that it's not him. Then, all hell seems to break loose. The entire house begins to shake. Picture frames begin falling off walls. The bed itself rocks back and forth, and the lights flicker as if toggled on and off by unseen forces. Ben then grabs Bridger, and Jamie grabs Jackson, and all together they rush downstairs to be with Tori. The only way the Shays feel safe now is to collectively sleep in one room, and with this realization, Jamie says out loud that they have to find some kind of spiritual help. The family then tries to salvage any rest that's left through the night, despite various bangs and the ominous presence that seemed to bear down upon them all. In the days to come, the family contacts the Central Arkansas Society for Paranormal Research. The group agrees to come to the house as soon as Tori is well enough to be moved. And within the next several weeks, the day finally comes. After getting the children a sitter for the night, the Shays are then greeted by the paranormal team. It takes some time, but they quickly set up their equipment and prepare for the night to come. The group includes a family, Alan Lowe, whose primary goal is gathering physical evidence, alongside his wife Angela and daughter Violet, who are both sensitive to the supernatural. The presence within the home makes almost an immediate impression upon Angela and Violet. In later interviews, Violet would say that, "I felt a heavy and depressing vibe almost immediately." Within the group is another woman by the name of Karen Schillings. Her job is to try and connect the paranormal happenings with historical factors, such as the house's history. Through her research, she's able to determine that the home itself was built in the year 1780 and was once a stagecoach and hotel. It then later became a jail. As part of the group's routine, Angela and Violet begin a walkthrough of the home to see if they can sense any entities that could perhaps be lurking inside. Going room to room, the two sense the same dark and depressive energy. They also start sensing the spirit of a small child who's too scared to approach them. They then also pick up on not one, but many entities. It's as if a sea of spirits surround them, and they are not happy in the slightest. As the two continue to explore, they would pick up on something else. Amidst the sea, they began to sense a dark and foreboding presence that seemed to permeate the air around them, something that wasn't human and perhaps never was. As Angela would describe in her later interviews, I hadn't been scared of a spirit since I was a small child, but this one truly scared me. While walking, the two simultaneously see a brief apparition of the creature. Its skin is dry and dead, its eyes hollow and soulless. It's as if it thrived on pain and misery. This thing, whatever it was, had never experienced a singular breath of humanity. As they finished their walkthrough, the mother and daughter then head back down to the base level of the home to tell the Shays what they had discovered and felt. They tell them that they believed a small boy was present within the house, as well as a multitude of other human spirits. They believed that these were the ones frequently speaking and were responsible for keeping their son up late at night. They then informed them of the very dark energy that they had felt and seen. The two were unsure of exactly just what the creature was, but asked for the family's permission to try and attempt to contact it via a Ouija board. The Shays reluctantly agree, and soon the team lays out the board within the dining room of the house. Ben, who is unsure about the Ouija board method, is in control of the planchette alongside Alan. The group then begins to ask questions as they attempt to speak with the negative entity. Upon asking for its name, the planchette begins to move. It then, letter by letter, spells out S-E-T-H. When asked when it was alive, the planchette again, letter by letter, spells out the word never. The answers seem to confirm everyone's worst fears. They believed that they had been dealing with a demon. Then, the planchette, without any assistance from Alan or Ben, starts moving erratically across the board, to everyone's shock and horror. It then flies off the board and towards the crew's cameras. Feeling like this was a sign, the group then reviews the footage, and to further horror, everyone sees the grotesque figure on the monitor as it floats eerily down the hallway and then dissipates into nothingness. Asking the Shays just what could have perhaps summoned a demon into their home, they are at first at a loss for words. However, Ben and Jamie quickly remember that when they had first seen the house, there had been strange symbols and pentagrams within its walls. Could this have perhaps been the cause? The group concludes that, even if it was some teens experimenting with the occult, as first thought, that they still could have opened up a gateway or a portal to the other side and allowed this entity to come in and infest. Angela believed that the family was in imminent danger, and if something wasn't done immediately, that this demon could inflict very real harm upon them, as shown with the potential tie to the previous car accident. She then suggests a ritual cleansing of the house. Almost as soon as the words leave her mouth, the planchette begins to violently move in a figure-8 motion, whipping back and forth with rage. Then, in a ritualistic fashion, Angela begins to burn sage within the home, attempting to cleanse it of any and all negative forces. As the smoke and prayers fill the air, the windows open and close by themselves. The lights flicker, and almost everything, it seems like, within the home begins to move and shake with energy. Violet sees visions of all the souls that appear to be within the house itself, or bound to the land. She now believes that the entity Set was perhaps drawn to their energy and has been feeding upon it as a source, as well as the turmoil being caused to the Shay family. Following the saging, the raging atmosphere continues like a storm. Angela and her daughter then make their way outside and begin pouring a ring of blessed salt around the property, creating a barrier to protect the home and all who dwell within it. with the circle connected around the home. Almost the minute the granules meet one another, the movement within ceases. In her later interviews, Jamie would say this in regards to this very night. After the cleansing, I felt an immediate change. Instead of feeling a sense of evil, I felt a sense of peace in the air. I felt that the sense of evil had been lifted. Following these night's events, the next several months, life for the Shays returns to normal. Tori makes a full recovery, and the family seems relatively happy, all things considered. That was until one very strange evening. As Ben and Jamie discuss things they needed to take care of, their son Bridger walks into the room. However, something seems very off about the young boy. He's just standing there and staring at them, almost in a trance-like state. He then opens his mouth and begins to speak, but what comes through him is not his own voice. Instead, a dark, raspy, and menacing tone comes through, a half-laughing, half-wicked sound that deeply disturbs his parents. Jamie runs up and gives him a small shake, trying to get her son to come too, and thankfully, he does. However, he doesn't remember wandering into their room at all. Freaking out as anyone would, Jamie then asks her son to stay with his father as she quickly runs to grab baby Jackson. Upon picking him up out of his crib, she begins to hear two very distinct voices floating around her. They seem to be getting louder and louder as she makes her way back towards the bedroom door. Headed out of the room and into the hallway, she then finds a scared-looking Tori standing before her. As she asks her to quickly come with her, Tori points to the end of the hallway behind them. There, mere feet away, it's large and robed, with the same cracked skin and glassy black pits for eyes. Screaming and grabbing her daughter as well, Jamie then runs them all down the stairs and back towards Ben and Bridger. These series of events left the Shays with seemingly no other choice. Out of fear for their lives, they would jump into the family minivan and leave behind what was once their dream home. As a result of this, they would quietly put their home up on the market and move to a nearby apartment. Ben would graduate school in the months to come, and upon the sale of the house, the couple would take the money and move to a brand new town where they started life anew. Before we go, I wanted to share my thoughts on this case and some of the details that I noticed. The whole ordeal, contrary to what most typically occurs, seemed to make the Shays a much stronger family unit instead of tearing them apart, which is always a positive thing to see come out of these hauntings. From what I could find, it seems that the Shays are still thriving, and thank God for that, given all that they've been through. This case strikes me as more genuine compared to many others that I've seen. I've drawn those conclusions not only from the Shays' actions throughout their story, but from listening to interviews years after. They seem like very credible and decent people, to me at least. Did a portal exist within the Shay home? I certainly think that it's possible, considering they found occult-related symbolism and other ritual items within the home before they even officially lived there. It's hard to tell if it was some kids playing around or something more methodical. Regardless, a door could have been opened, inadvertently or otherwise, allowing these entities to come in and wreak havoc upon lives. Upon having the paranormal research group come in and attempt to communicate with the dark entity within the home, it's interesting that the name that came out of the Ouija board session was Seth or Set. Interestingly, those names are the same names for the Egyptian god of chaos. This figure is also known as a trickster figure at times. Could the entity and the god be one and the same? I mean, it's certainly possible, albeit unlikely in my opinion, but I found this element pretty interesting, and I needed to share it with you all. They also mentioned that the planchette on the Ouija board moved in a figure 8 pattern. This is also very interesting because it's also a characteristic of the demon Zozo. I think this is the first case outside of that original story and the first-hand accounts of interactions with said demon that I've heard of this phenomena manifesting. And I do have to say, all seriousness aside, this case is covered on one of my all-time favorite shows, which is called A Haunting. And I went back and rewatched the episode that features the story, which is called Where Evil Lurks. And dude, the acting, the parts that feature the creature's portrayal on the show are absolutely hilarious. Like, what even is that? Like, come on, guys, you could have done better. Albeit, I always enjoy the show and the stories being told. That part was just way too funny for me not to mention. Now, saging is a very ancient and useful practice. I've seen it work with my own eyes in one of the most disturbing and violent hauntings that I've ever experienced. And it literally forced the entity outside, where it then proceeded to bang on the walls and windows, and occasionally the floor and ceiling. It's a whole saga of a story. If you guys aren't familiar with it, maybe I'll go into it more so here another day. But that convinced me that saging can very much work. The particular cleansing ritual that was used in this case combined saging with Christian prayer, which I'm sure could be effective. However, if the portal was left open, which I think it was, the entity just made its way back into the home, and or another or multiple other entities made their way back in, because the Shays continued to be haunted, and it was that ultimately led to them leaving. I also can't judge them for selling the house as it was. They tried to handle things the best way that they knew how, and I hope whoever ended up with it after and up to present day were able to get things more spiritually calmed down, so to speak, and weren't nearly as haunted and plagued as the Shays were. I hope wherever the Shay family is today that they're happy, safe, and thriving. And I always mention this just to be on the safe side. Please respect their privacy and anyone else's privacy of stories that we've covered here. With that being said, unfortunately, sometimes when we think we've found our happily ever after, it ends up being nothing more than a trap. A lurid false sense of security that when our guard is finally down, the monster within the darkness strikes like a viper from the shadows. So be wary and take precautions, and don't let this be you. After a terrifying encounter with a demonic entity in the woods outside of their home, two brothers find themselves under attack by dark and malevolent forces. With no place of refuge from torment, not even their own home, will they escape the wrath of a real-life nightmare they have unearthed, or will the darkness take them? This is the untold story of the demonic Shadow Man case that was experienced by brothers Tom and Tim Yancey. With the majority of my audience not being subscribed, please consider subscribing with notifications on, liking the video, and leaving a comment, as well as checking out one of hundreds of videos available on my channel. Thank you. Lake Worth, Florida, founded in 1913, the city plays home to the arts, boasting festivals, boutiques, music venues, and a historic theater. But amongst the songs, paintings, and acting, it is also the home to something evil that lurks just beneath the surface. In the late 1960s, the Yancey family called Lake Worth their home. Living near the mostly underdeveloped southern woods in the town at that time, brothers Tim and Tom, along with their father Sonny and mother Barbara, up until this point, had lived a rather quiet life. Tim would describe his childhood home as a very peaceful and remote place to live. It was fairly isolated and in the middle of nowhere. His mother, Barbara, was a beacon of light and joy, a woman who always had a diamond smile upon her face. His father was a stern man, a battle-hardened Korean War veteran who then worked as a carpenter doing construction. Sonny suffered from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, as a result of the war, and according to Barbara, was a totally different person when he came back. He had been a sergeant in charge of a mortar platoon during the war and would very rarely speak of what had happened. Although both of the brothers later would recall that he told them a few different stories of his time there. One story that following a battle, he had to arrange for mass graves to be dug and for bulldozers to lay the dead to rest. While suffering with PTSD, Sonny tended to have a short fuse on his temper, but for some reason, this particular summer, it seemed to get inexplicably worse. Where the family lived was remote and surrounded by lush woods, and prior to being settled, the land where the house now stood had been heavily utilized during the slave trade, as well as being the home to numerous bouts of violence between warring Native American tribes. So with the combinations of the terrors of war and those experiencing persecution, over the years, these heavy emotions seemed to leak into the earth, and the woods in and of themselves seemed to become a beacon for darkness, almost as if the black hearts of those who perpetrated the acts still rested beneath the leaves, sticks, and stones of the forest floor. Playing together as brothers often do, Tim and Tom would spend much time within those very same woods, bonding, exploring, and having a great time. Sonny had built a fort for the boys to enhance their time spent out there, and at this time, Tom was 12 years old and Tim was 7. One chilly fall day, as Tom ventured into the woods alone, as he approached the fort, he began to get an eerie feeling, as if someone or something was watching him. With his inner voice screaming, he bolted and ran inside the fort. As he peered through the openings in between the various boards and peeking past the cloth-covered windows, at first he saw nothing. But as his heart began to subside from beating out of his chest, he began to hear the crunching of crisp autumn leaves around him. And through the darkness of the boards, he sees a silhouette of a creature. Although the figure appears man-like, something tells him that it's not of this world. Tom, doing the sensible thing, runs for his life, leaving the fort behind. Terrified at what he had just experienced, he decides to not tell anyone about what had happened. As Tom ventures back to the house, disturbed by what he had been through, Tim had entered through another path in the woods, blissfully unaware of his brother's plight. As the boy walks the crispy path of dried leaves, he too begins to feel as if he's being watched. Then in front of him, up in a tree, he sees something strange, something out of place. There in the tree, with the environment reacting around it, there appears to be some kind of creature, but this creature is either see-through or it's reflecting its surroundings, almost like a freakish distortion of reality, perhaps something that shouldn't have been within the confines of our reality. As his eyes grow larger with fear, this entity begins to make its way down the tree and then lands in front of him, mere feet away from the boy, hitting the ground with a loud thud. This is enough to truly frighten the young man, and he too, similar to his brother, decides to run for the house, the one place a child should feel safe to be. Tim frantically makes his way out of the woods and quickly into the arms of his mother, who was near the front door of their house. After explaining things as best as he could, Barbara calms him with the love only a mother can provide, asking him to calm down She tried her best to convince him that it was perhaps an animal that he had startled, and that things would be okay. And although she did what she could, as we'll come to see, this would be far from what would take place. The brothers in due time would discuss the strangeness of their experiences in the woods with one another, confiding in each other, and trying to make sense of just what this thing or what these things were. Fearing that even talking about it could prompt a visit, the boys did their best to move on and shift their focus to other activities, fearing that if they spoke of it, they would invoke the wrath of what they began to call the Shadow Man. During the day, things seemed to regain a small amount of normalcy, but at night, the brothers began to see the very same figure outside, usually near the tree line, presenting a thick, man-like shadow, always watching and lurking like a wild animal stalking its prey. One night, as the moon peeks through the clouds overhead, Tim is jolted awake out of a sound sleep. With his eyes opening and slowly adjusting to the darkness of his room, he tries to make sense as to why he was suddenly woke up. As he glances towards his window, with the faintest amount of moonlight illuminating the room, he sees a shadow go past. Scared, but getting up to investigate, he reluctantly looks, and he sees nothing. Thinking that perhaps his mind is playing tricks on him, Tim lays his head back down to try and sleep again. But as he gets comfortable, right before he closes his eyes, he again sees this menacing shadow pass by his window. Attempting to wake up his brother, but unable to do so, he once again gathers the courage to take a look through the window. Peering around their yard and towards the tree line, there in the mists emanating from the woods, he sees the shadowy outline of a man. And this man appears to be staring directly into his soul from afar. It then suddenly begins to rush towards him. Absolutely petrified with fear, the young man lets out a blood-curdling scream. His brother quickly wakes up, and so do his parents. With Sonny being the first inside the room, he asks just what is happening. After being told by Tim that there was a man in the yard, he quickly grabs a flashlight and begins sweeping the property. He ultimately would find nothing. Several weeks later, as the boys slept in their room, 12-year-old Tom starts acting strangely. Waking up to the sound of footsteps, Tim sees his brother in the middle of their room. As he calls out to him, he receives no response, and Tom then begins to walk and leave their room. Calling out to their parents as well as his brother, Tim continues to follow him as he descends the stairs, headed towards their front door. With Sonny and Barbara rushing close behind him, they watch as Tom heads out of the front door and into the yard. As Tim would describe it later, it was as if he was being called out to something, or there was something drawing him into those woods. It was very frightening for me, because I knew there was something out there, and I didn't understand why this was all happening. Sonny is able to wake the boy up as the four stand in the yard. Tom seemed to have been sleepwalking, unaware of what was taking place. Although this hadn't happened previously, and was completely new to the family, this incident would be far from the last. For the next several weeks, Tom would continue to sleepwalk. At times, with other members of the family unaware that he was missing, Tom would find himself waking up next to the lake, out in those foreboding woods. To try and keep the boy from sleepwalking, his parents began to implement measures to keep him from leaving the house. Frustrated, and understandably so, having to get up late into the night, what soon became night after night, with Tom often able to maneuver his way out of locked rooms, they took to stacking chairs in front of the boys' room, in hopes that this would prevent Tom from escaping and potentially hurting himself under one of his spells. Later that night, after the family had gone to bed, Tom took to waking up as per usual. As he aimlessly tries to unlock the door to their room, he wakes up Tim. Fearing that his brother would wake up their father, he tries to get him to wake up and realize just what he's doing. And while this is taking place, the closet door directly across the room from Tom begins to shudder, and then it opens by itself. Then, as if he was being controlled like a marionette puppet, Tom would turn around, face the closet, and then walk inside. Then, with the boy inside, the door would shut behind him, once again seemingly by itself, as if it were operated by unseen hands. Tim, scared but also transfixed on what was taking place, began to hear a conversation. He heard his brother speaking, then he heard another voice, a low, gravelly, deep voice. This frightens the young Tim so bad that despite his fear of his father, he calls out to his parents for protection, and thankfully, his parents heed the call. As they rush to push the chairs aside, they finally do, and then throw the door open to find out just what had happened now. Tim, pointing to the closet, indicates that Tom is inside. Heading to the closet door and opening it, they find the boy sat down inside now, apparently awake. Upon asking him just what was going on, all Tom could say was that there was a man in here. In later interviews, Tom would say that he remembers waking up inside the darkness of the closet to the voice of a man, and then upon speaking with him, towards the back of the closet, he saw two red eyes staring back at him. Despite knowing of their son's sleepwalking, his parents tried to argue that he was clearly messing around in the closet, possibly playing with toys, and they then scolded both of the boys for waking them up yet again. In the weeks to come, as their parents grow increasingly angry, the Yancey brothers continue to experience the abyssal force that they have come to refer to as the Shadow Man. One night, the entity seems to find a new way of terrorizing the brothers. Tim has suddenly woken up when he begins to feel small things hit his comforter and mattress. Feeling where the objects had fallen, his hands discover rocks like small pebbles, and thinking it was his brother messing with him, he asked him to stop and then laid his head back down onto his pillow. And then more of them started falling, pelting the blanket that covered him. He now knows for certain it is not Tom, because he's looking directly at him, and he is fast asleep. As the rocks continue falling onto him, he then discovers leaves, and then pine cones as well. Then he feels something drop onto his head, and this something begins to crawl. Prying off whatever this thing was and throwing it, the boy begins to scream. Barbara soon comes to his aid, and upon turning on the lights, she too finds the stones, pine cones, leaves, and to her surprise, giant Florida cockroaches. It was as if the Shadow Man was bringing in things from the woods, but for what reason remained unclear. It was with this incident that Barbara began to notice that perhaps it wasn't just the boys' imaginations at work. Perhaps there was something terrorizing them. In the weeks that follow this incident, Barbara too begins to notice the ever-growing hostile environment within the home, and soon begins to seek answers from any and all sources. While her husband is at work and her children are at school, she purchases a Ouija board, and upon returning home, places it on the coffee table in the living room. Not being into the occult previously, she doesn't really know what she's doing, but wants to do her best to communicate with whatever could be there, and to try and seek answers as to why it was tormenting her family. She tries to make contact, but doesn't receive any answers. Later that day, the family retires to their beds to catch some sleep. Little did they know of Barbara's attempts to contact the other side, and little did they know that hell was about to be unleashed upon them. As everyone drifts off to dreamland, Tim once again finds himself being woken up out of a dead sleep. Perhaps it was his intuition. It's hard to know for sure why. But as he wakes up and sits up in his bed, he sees a dark hand emerge from the closet in their room. As the familiar fear grips him, he gets up and shakes his brother Tom awake. And to Tom's disbelief, as he looks ahead where his brother is pointing, he too sees the hand. And then a more fuller figure begins to emerge from the closet opening. Before both of their eyes, a shadowy figure emerges, casting itself onto the wall, with glowing red eyes staring at them. It begins to climb horizontally on the wall towards them. With the brothers absolutely shaken to their core, they scream for their parents as the figure dissipates, as if it was never there. The two then rush out of their bedroom and run up to their parents' bedroom. And although apprehensive because of their father, they would rather deal with his wrath than that of the Shadow Man. Doing a knock and then opening their door, Tim leads the boys and calls out to their parents. He tells them that the man was back and that he was on their wall like a fly. This bizarre statement from his son and the continuous lack of sleep prompts Sonny to explode. He tells the boys that there is no man, that they're dealing with the boogeyman, and that the boogeyman does bad things to bad kids, and if they were good, he would simply just go away. With tears in his eyes, Tim and his brother would make their way back to their bedroom. Tim would later recall, this notion that I was a bad kid, that I had done something wrong, and that something had come to punish me for my misdeeds, is something that has stuck with me my entire life. I didn't know what I had done to deserve this. From that point on, the boys keep silent about the nightmare experiences that they had had with the entity known to them as the Shadow Man. But the entity seems to grow ever stronger. But even though they have been silent, the rage that dwells within their father, Sonny, also continues to grow. Tim later again would say, he seemed to not understand what was happening in the house, and this led to a lot of family dysfunction. Whether this attracted whatever this thing was to us, or it fed off of the negative emotions or whatever, there was some kind of connection there. These entities seem to do this, and it's like a coupling. The entity attaches itself to a family and then continues to cause problems and seems to derive energy from this. As time passes, the boys find themselves awake on the night of Christmas Eve. Being rambunctious kids as some of us were, they decided to sneak downstairs to take a peek at some of their Christmas presents under the family tree in the living room. The boys seemed to be successful, not alerting their parents to their sneaky endeavors downstairs, when suddenly, loud booming knocks begin to come from upstairs. Trying to figure out what could be causing it, they realize that they seem to be originating from their room. Downstairs upon their mantel next to the tree, their mother had set up a nativity scene showing Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus. As the banging intensifies further, the scene begins to shake and move. It then drops to the floor, shattering the porcelain figures. The breaking only adding to the cacophony of sound, now reverberating all throughout the house. Then the heavy footsteps of their father cuts through the noise. As he descends the stairs, the boys are trapped. He is pissed, and then he finds the shattered porcelain figures, and this further enrages him. As he interrogates the boys as to what they could have been doing, The boys deny causing the sounds or breaking the figures, but this too only serves to deepen his rage. Since the boys, quote, wanted to stay up, they could do so outside. Using a scare tactic, he marches the boys outside and into the yard, right near the tree line of the forest. He tells them that he was going to get a good night's sleep, and they were to stay outside all night. Little does he know, he has inadvertently delivered his sons into the arms of perdition. The air is cold and bites at their skin as a large moon hovers above them, and the low rustle of leaves surround them. The two young men, despite their best efforts to comfort one another, are absolutely paralyzed with fear as they stand in the darkness of the night. They both suddenly hear the crunching of leaves from behind them. Upon turning around, they are besieged by the Shadow Man yet again. Screaming for their mother as they run up to their deck, they beg to be let back into the house. Finally, their mother has woke up and forces their father to come with her and let the boys back in, finding the punishment to be cruel, especially since she knows herself that there are things at work that none of them understand. Tim would later say this when interviewed: "My father's anger continued to grow, and he became increasingly frustrated. He would blame the noises on us, and his punishments were severe. The goal of this monster seemed to be to create more anger, more chaos, and more depression within our family." The situation grew bleaker day after day, and on a cold and stormy night, as Tim laid in his bed, he was all too familiarly woken up, without warning. This time, however, something was different. His sheets and blankets were pulled from him. And as Tim would later say, "You know something's there. It's in the room with you, and you've got to reach down and pull those sheets back up." The boy reaches down to do just that, peering down as he grabs them off the floor. He thankfully doesn't see anything. Pulling them back over himself, now laying back down, he once again tries to get comfortable to sleep. As he starts to drift off, he then feels a sharp, searing pain on the right side of his ribs. Feeling this pain, his eyes pop open to find what appears to be a long, bony hand coming from underneath his sheets. Scared for his life, the boy screeches and runs as fast as his legs will carry him. But being this scared, he had his blinders on, because he ran directly into the door that was locked to try and prevent his brother from sleepwalking and ultimately leaving the house. He smacks into the door with a visceral crack, screaming in pain and crashing to the ground. This prompted the attention of his parents, who came into the room to discover their son writhing in agony. They would quickly rush him to the hospital, and it would turn out that Tim had broken both of his collarbones. Following this event, as the months turned to years, things from here did not get any better for the Yancey family. Tom, being the oldest, when he became old enough, left the house as quickly as he could, no longer able to deal with the dark forces that dwelled there. Tim, Sonny, and Barbara would not see him for years. Details past this point are practically non-existent, but I will do my best to bring a conclusion to this very haunting case based on what I could find. Over the next 30 years, Tom would play college football and then become a career firefighter. Tim, given all the experiences he experienced before and after his brother left, would become a paranormal investigator and a park ranger. Drifting apart as people do, they wouldn't reconnect until after their parents were gone. Sonny and Barbara had continued to live at the same house the two had grown up in and had had all of their Shadow Man experiences. When the brothers inherited the house, they came back together to decide just what to do with it. Tom, who had done practically everything to never return to the house, would later recall that he had a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach upon entering the house again, saying that it was just an evil, sickening feeling. As the brothers discussed things, it would become apparent that Tim wanted to move back into the home with his wife and reclaim it. So after working out a deal amongst themselves, that's exactly what Tim did. And by moving back in, he intended to cleanse the home, to rid themselves once and for all of this ominous presence that had caused them so much pain, the entity they knew as the Shadow Man. Prior to moving in, Tim would reach out to his friend Roy Hall, who had dealt with violent hauntings for many years, to help him perform a cleansing ritual of the home. Roy believed that the entity was demonic in nature and haunted the family because Tim's father was abusive. Sonny, who was a Korean War veteran, probably saw a good amount of the horrors of war. He believed that because of Sonny's PTSD, that perhaps the entity had been attached to the land and had seen this and exploited these problems as an entry into their lives, where it continued to wreak havoc upon all of them. As Roy would say in later interviews, these entities seek to cause further dysfunction. They feed upon it. The two men on a rainy and dreary afternoon would step into the home together. Roy would begin to pick up on the ominous, thick atmosphere almost immediately. Lighting incense and beginning various prayers, the two men go from room to room, cleansing. As they walk throughout the house, they sense that the presence is strongest in Tim and Tom's old room, calling out to God to cleanse the house of all evil and negativity. The process took about an hour, but following it, the energy in the house seemed to be rid once and for all of the Shadow Man. Tim recalled that things felt different. They felt much lighter, as if we had displaced the negative energy within the home. In August of 2009, Tim, his wife Trish, and son Gabriel all moved into the Lakewood, Florida home. Although they never experienced anything to the degree the boys did while growing up within it, there still seemed to be an undercurrent of evil just right below the surface. In closing, it is believed that the dysfunction of the Yancey household was more than likely far worse than what the sons portrayed publicly, but to what extent, I'm not sure. I did my best to dig as deep as I could, and I believe Tim and Tom are both still alive, with Tim still being a consultant to various paranormal groups across the country. I did want to say that their story was a terrifying and a harrowing one, and although somewhat anticlimactic in the end, as we know here on this channel, things don't always work out the way we want them to, and cases don't always have some kind of ultimate showdown. But a few questions I was left with after researching this case were, just what was the Shadow Man? Was it a demon? Did it exploit the vulnerabilities of the family, particularly Sonny, in order to create a feedback loop of negativity in which it could enrich itself with? And although from the outside looking in, those that are still with us who were involved seem to be doing okay, but just how has surviving the haunting affected these two men on a daily basis? Do they still think about it, as I occasionally do with my own experiences? All questions I may never have answers for, but one thing is certain. There was something evil that stalked the woodlands surrounding the Yancey home. Something stalking like a predator, seeking prey. And although things seem to be dormant for now, these malevolent entities may still be watching and lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to strike. Don't let their victim be you. Thank you guys so much for watching this new video. Please let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and if you have any particular cases that you'd like me to research and cover, let me know. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe with notifications on, And consider checking out the YouTube membership program and or supporting me on Patreon. Or if you'd prefer to have something cool and in your hands and want to help support the channel as well, consider purchasing my book, Stories from the Archives Volume 1, from either my Shopify store or Amazon. Other than that, guys, numbers are still down, but we are very slowly but surely on the way back up as far as I can tell. So to everyone who has supported me and the channel and has been regularly watching, interacting, and sharing, thank you guys so much. You're all the best. Anyways, guys, new and limited merchandise will be coming your way very soon, and I appreciate each and every one of you. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time.